Great. Welcome, everybody. As I said, it's so great. It's really wonderful to see familiar faces amongst the tiny, tiny Zoom tiles and to see some new people as well. Thank you for joining us for this fireside chat on LiveView with the incredible, the incomparable, you know him, you love him, Bruce Tate. Honestly, really, Bruce, I feel like you need no introduction, but I will introduce you anyway because one of my hobbies is saying nice things about the people that I'm overjoyed to know and get to work with. So Bruce comes to us by way of Graxio fame. You guys may have taken some of his courses or gone through some of his content there. The tagline for Graxio is career fuel. I don't know why I feel like it's a tongue twister. Career fuel for programmers. And that's certainly been my experience whenever I take any of the tutorials or courses there. I just feel like your learning is so accelerated. And I know that there's some really cool stuff coming out on Julia. If you're interested in dipping your toe into the world of math and machine learning, Bruce has also written many, many books on various topics, including lots of books with Pragmatic Bookshelf, including the new book that he and I have co-authored, Programming Phoenix LiveView, which we're so excited to talk to you about today. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't also plug the podcast, Beam Radio. Bruce, me, a couple other folks who I think are many of them here today. Laura Vickman, who's on this call, Stephen Nunez, Alex Kutmos, a couple of others, people who are going to be giving talks today and tomorrow. Run a podcast, as I said, Beam Radio, where we just hang out and talk about all things Beam. So if you absolutely can't get enough of everything we say today, then you should probably listen to our podcast as well. Other things you can ask Bruce about, he recently built a pretty cool Nerves powered clock. And then also, I think the bookcase that you see behind him. So if we run out of LiveView topics, I'm sure there will be no shortage of things to talk about. What a handsome bookcase. And I'll just introduce myself very briefly. Hi, I'm Sophie, co-author the Programming LiveView book that's out now in beta from Prague with Bruce, co-host the Beam Radio podcast, and currently working as a senior engineer at GitHub. And this is my dog who will probably not move for the duration of this session or the day or his life. If he could really stay there forever, that is what he would do. All right, so I see we've got one question coming through. There are like 60 plus people in this session though, so I very much hope and expect to see more. Like I said, we want to hear from you. This is a conversation not just between me and Bruce, but between us and all of you guys. So please, please, please submit your questions there through the Q&A, through the chat, or just chime in Zoom. But before we jump into our very first question from the audience, which I honestly haven't looked at yet, I'll pull that up in a moment. I've got a couple of questions that I wanted to toss at Bruce to kind of warm us up and pick his brain a little bit. So this is something that you talked a little bit about recently. I think I saw you tweeted about it, Bruce. I'm very curious to hear a little bit more on the topic of open source. Open source is obviously the lifeblood of everything that we all do all day, every day. And it is very hard and it is very much about people. So I am curious, who would you like to thank?
Oh gosh, there's such a long list. In something like LiveView, of course, there are the people that do the technology. Chris McCord has been working on this a very long time. And the abstractions that he started with, he didn't even start in the Elixir language. And it's been so fun to watch this thing grow layer by layer in the Programming Phoenix book, and then from MVC to quickly to channels, and then channels to kind of hammering around the edges, all the things that needed to make this work, like the pub sub and like the presence, and then finally getting into this into getting the JavaScript into the infrastructure, which is so exciting. So thank you, Chris, and to the Phoenix team. They've done a wonderful job. Also, thank you to the people who have talked about and helped to promote LiveView. I feel like there's a lot of people out there that have helped frame the conversation, and that's such a powerful thing. Just like with programming concepts, when you're able to say the words together, LiveView, and it means more than just the two words stacked together. It means we're going to take a couple of functions, one that controls the way you render things, one that controls the way that you change content. We're going to put those things together so that we can keep your head on the server. Then you can build things with very quickly that way. It's like having a blueprint for a house instead of telling each carpenter what to do. It's really a powerful model. So thanks to all the people who have said things about LiveView in blogs and in podcasts. And also thanks to the great content creators out there. I know it goes well beyond just Groxio. Mike Clark's got um, a wonderful course out there that's absolutely brilliant. And so those are just a few for me. And what about you, Sophie? I know that you've um, we've come at the Elixir world from vastly different experiences. So I know that you've got some ideas as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think going through the process of writing this book with you has really opened my eyes to the incredible amount of effort that so many people around the world are putting into building out the tools and the educational resources that, of course we all rely on, like I said, every day. And, writing a book is very different than working on an open source project. The key difference is that you guys are going to pay me money to read this book that we're writing. And that's not necessarily the case for the open source maintainers among us. But I would just kind of give a shout out in general to everyone out there who is writing content for people that are trying to program in Elixir and trying to work with the Beam. And that could be a single person with your blog and you're posting stuff on your own, or to Dev2 or Medium. Certainly to all the folks who contribute to and maintain Elixir School, which is an incredible resource. And one of the things that I love about it is that it's translated into so many different languages. So just seeing people around the world come together, create these resources to make them more accessible to people around the world is like such a special thing. So certainly I would echo the thank you that you're putting out to all of the people that are building Elixir and building LiveView and building Phoenix, but just an additional thank you to anyone that's building educational resources as well.
Yeah, and I have a question for you, Sophie. I love this question because we tend to think about things in different ways. The writing partnership is a great one because um, part of being a good author is knowing when to lie, right? So it's you very often are telling incomplete truths, and so there's a balance that you strike between precision and getting all the detail out there and simplicity, and I think that that we're always kind of thinking about that. But along the lines of that question, what's the single biggest piece of advice that you would give to a new LiveView developer?
You're turning this back on me because I was going to ask you that. And so I was like, I don't have to think about the answer to this question because Bruce is going to answer it.
That's why I sent you the question.
I know. Ugh. All right, missed opportunity. So the question is, what is the piece of advice you would give to somebody that's a new LiveView developer? And I think that the advice I would give to that person is not very different than the advice that I would give to any person that is going to be a new X developer or a new developer in general. And it is just basically don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. And I think what that means to me is it's okay to start something and feel like you absolutely don't know what you're doing. And it's okay to go out there looking for the resource that answers a certain question and actually not find it. And the one thing that I always love to see people do when they hit that situation is write the thing that you wish you had, even if it's really just for yourself or for your own blog. Doesn't matter if it's going to make the biggest splash that the world has ever seen. I think turning around and taking opportunities to write and teach about what you yourself are encountering for the first time is so valuable. And I think we need that more and more, in the tech community in general, and especially in the Elixir community, which is growing so fast. It's truly insane how many people and companies or whatever around the world are adopting Elixir and kind of getting more and more into the Beam. So the more beginners who are coming in and who are able to start sharing their own experiences and putting out resources about what they're learning and how it's going for them, I think it's just going to accelerate that growth even further. So I guess it's not really like a hard and fast piece of advice. If you want to learn live, you just do X, but a little bit more general. So now can I turn it back on you, Bruce? What's your advice to a new LiveView developer?
You can. I think that probably the biggest piece of advice is to spend a lot of time digging into the base abstraction. One of the things that we do in the book is we start to think about Elixir in the terms of reduce, right? So that we have this pipeline where you have You have things that you have a convenient form for transformations, and that's the socket. And everything is getting into that socket with the mount process and the various pieces of the life cycle, or updating that socket. And that's through something that's not technically an Elixir reducer, but if you hold your head sideways, it really is, right? The handle infos and handle events, they're big deals for working with the reductions. And then the last piece of that CRC pipeline is the render, right? So the idea is that a constructor builds a convenient form for computation, which is the socket, and that's our accumulator and reduce. And then individual reduction steps actually build on top of that, and those are your handle events. And then there's a function that converts something for convenient consumption. And with anything related to the web, that's creating string formats, right? It might be HTML, it might be SVG or something like that. So that's my biggest piece of advice. Learn the basic abstraction, and I'll paste into the chat when we have a chance. There's a Medium article that I wrote to basically tell this story, because I tell it so often. That's called "It's All Reduced in Elixir."
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think you're going to find a lot. I mean, I'm going to plug the book a little bit throughout this conversation. Like, I can't help it. You're going to find a lot of that in the book. One of the things that I've certainly learned a lot from you, Bruce, while we've been writing this is how to kind of layer these abstractions together, exactly as you're saying. And that's a theme that's like woven very intentionally through all of the features that you'll build out if you decide to join us on the live journey in the new book. But that said, I am going to jump over to our Q&A because we have many questions flooding in. Thank you guys. And I'm going to start with the first one from Lars, so I feel like is setting us up because you have to know the answer to this question, but that's okay. It's good to chat about with everyone. Have either of you started poking at the component library surface for LiveView? I haven't. That's why I feel like it's a setup, but I'm curious to hear from Bruce or maybe anyone else.
I really like the ideas behind Surface. I think that we are just kind of poking around the edges of what components can be in LiveView. And the reason that it's difficult is that with the traditional web framework, the problem is one-dimensional. It's since web engines are request response, they're just functions. We have all the tools that we need for composing those functions, right? So helpers and all the little abstractions that we use to make layouts and input helpers, they make components very straightforward. But when you fold in the concept of behavior, it's going to take us longer to get that abstraction right. And I think that Surface takes a look at one really important part, or actually several really important parts of that problem. And one of those is, how do you type things? Two is, how do you express them? How do you handle the expressiveness and the render function? And it's all really, really well thought out, which I guess you kind of expect with Dashbit technologies. But I think it's brilliant. I haven't used it as much as I'd like. And it's mainly because Sophie and I are spending a lot of time in new Elixir communities. Programming LiveView is very much an on-ramp book. That's what we wanted to write. The mentor programs that we work with together, and shout out to Stephen for helping with this. Shout out to Okoth for being a part of it in Kenya. These are on-ramp type technologies. So I feel like we've been investing most of our time in making those models easy to consume and teach.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo that a little bit, which is, yeah, similarly, I haven't gotten my hands dirty with it yet, but it's very encouraging and exciting to see libraries and frameworks like this springing up around LiveView or as kind of part of the LiveView ecosystem, because one of the claims that I think we're really implicitly making, maybe explicitly in parts in the book, is that LiveView has a big future, really. I think it's going to be a great fit for like maybe 95% of the sort of off-the-shelf web apps that you find yourself needing to build in your professional life. So seeing that there are frameworks and libraries coming into play that are going to be supporting it, that are going to be leveraging it, that are going to make it even better in terms of choosing LiveView as the tool to solve your problem, it's very exciting to see.
Yeah, and I think it's also cool that some of these frameworks like Surface are particularly exciting because they're not just poking around the surface, pun intended, right? They're trying to dig into the hardest parts of the problem, and that's really exciting to me. That it's time and worth taking that next dive down. And I think that the authentication work that phoenix.gen.auth is another example of that, that it's really starting to take on the difficult problems. That's really cool to me.
We've got a couple other questions that are queuing up here. Two of them are on similar topics. I'm going to try to sort of sum them up together. Let me see if I can find the two that I had in mind. So one of them is about authorization. Have you found a good way to deal with authorization between LiveView and non-LiveView pages, since LiveView doesn't really have the same plug pipeline? And this is very related to another question that's here about working with the con inside of LiveView, like setting the current user. It looks like only the socket is available. How can I mention that? Or how can I manage that? Excuse me. So Bruce, do you want to share any wisdom on that? Otherwise, I'm happy to jump in as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that you could cover it better than I could, but let me take a shot anyway. So one of the cool things about the con is that it is one of these particular frameworks that I think that Stephen called like a tokenizer style function, right? And the idea is that you have these individual isolated functions that can do a little bit of work at a time, right? So the shape of it is that you have some input parameters, like maybe a web request. And then you have a convenient form for consumption. And in this case, it's the plug.connection. And then at some point, there's a converter that takes you from plug land and into LiveView land, right? And so that connection is available to you when you make the connection, when you cut over from plug land to Elixir land. And I think that mainly comes through what you get the params and the socket. So I think that that there are plugs that help you move data between the two. Did I get that right, Sophie?
Yeah, absolutely. So you will have access to your current user from the session, and then you actually can grab some stuff out of the con when the live view first loads and first mounts. So a lot of you guys might be familiar with this piece of the live view lifecycle already, but your live view is actually going to mount and render twice. The very first time, user goes to the web page, visits / whatever that's backed by live view, that's just an HTTP request, and you're going to get back a static HTTP response. So that first time through the mount and render lifecycle of that live view, the socket actually has a section in it that includes data that is pulled from the con. And I think that's there under, is it temporary assigns or something like that? And there are some convenience functions for working with that data. I believe assign new is one of them. I might be getting the details a little bit wrong, but you guys get the idea. So the first time through, since that's just a regular HTTP request, you can pull stuff out of con, use it on that initial page load, and then the WebSocket handshake occurs. The live view is mounted and rendered a second time, this time over the persistent WebSocket connection. You don't have access to the con anymore at that point, but there's also some tricks and tips for working with the con in that way as well.
But the main concept is that and this is why we work so well together, right? It's like high level, low level, And so, but the beautiful concept is that we have this beautiful reducer pipeline that has constructor that's basically Phoenix, the app, right? And it kind of builds this connection that flows all the way through the endpoint, all the way through the router. And then once you hit that live, you're flipping the switch. You're going from plug land to socket land. And during that transition, there are techniques that you can use to move things from from the con to sessions. You can graft out params. You can do those kinds of things, make those things available in the first render, and then you can grab that data and move it into your socket explicitly. And I like that this is explicit so that you don't have the kinds of security holes that you might otherwise see.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in that there is a whole chapter in the Programming LiveView book dedicated to authenticating your Phoenix LiveView application. As Bruce said earlier, we wanted this book to be very much an on-ramp into kind of building a brand new Phoenix LiveView app from the ground up, like you would if you were in the wild, let's say, or in your professional life. So we've included, you're going to use the Phoenix Gen Auth generator to generate out a whole authentication infrastructure for your Phoenix app, and you're going to use that generated code to authenticate your LiveView. We wanted this to be a really comprehensive look at really all the basics that you're going to need to be productive in LiveView. So with that, there are so many good questions. I'm so excited to talk about these. We've got a question from David. What is missing from LiveView? What are the gaps that need to be addressed in the library or in the community?
What do you think, Sophie?
I mean, I feel like I've been so heads down on, getting this book out that right now I have very much rose-colored glasses for everything LiveView. I just think it's so wonderful, and everything I need to do, I can definitely do in LiveView, but everything I need to do has been like create an example app for a book that's meant to be, more of an on-ramp experience. One thing that came up recently, a colleague of mine at GitHub actually just started this discussion on Elixir forum, so I certainly recommend folks head there to check it out. But he was feeling like he had some questions around how LiveView performs when you're dealing with degraded web connections. And, do you sort of miss that, okay, well, it's just JavaScript, so it doesn't matter if the web connection isn't so strong or working so hot, like at least I can still open and close modals. So that is an area that I would be curious to see develop more.
So yeah, I would think that there's probably 4 areas that you might see a big appetite. Well, I mean, first, this is when you're talking about a behavior, you're talking about a program, an outer shell that somebody else wrote. That has opinions. It will always have opinions, right? So where are some of the places? So there are 2 types of questions, right? One, the first question is the easy one to solve. There are things that just haven't been implemented yet. And it's dangerous to make assumptions about things that people in the Elixir community haven't invented yet. Elixir is not good for number crunching, y'all, right? Those kinds of things. What about multi-part forms, image uploads? What about, all these kinds of things. But yes, I would say that quality of connection is one, and closely related to that is disconnected experience. Also related to that is client-side processing for things like games, right? So if I were solving those problems individually, so and there are some like loose lines around that, right? So we'll have a simple game in the book, and the reason that we do it is that we think that games provide a good model for teaching LiveView. That said, when you're doing pretty heavy, rich communication on the client, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And so the last piece of it is, I think that there are a number of more isolated, targeted systems. This is an integrated solution. So if you're going for a more isolated solution, maybe something like a NURBS, maybe LiveView wouldn't have as much of a role. But I think probably the bigger thing to say on this question is the roles for applications on the web that don't, or I'm sorry, the realm of applications on the web that don't fit LiveView is shrinking. And the reason is that there are some excellent programmers thinking a lot about those problems and making them better for us.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked about this on the podcast, but I've very much had this experience where any time, earlier on in LiveView's lifespan, when I've wished I could do a certain thing in LiveView and I couldn't do it, anywhere from a few weeks to days later, like that is solved. And now there's, like you said, multi-part outflows, or now there's JS interop. So I am just super excited to see, honestly, what's next. And I think that sets the stage, us talking about sort of the shrinking space for apps where LiveView is not a good fit. I think this sets the stage for this great question from Amos. What is the biggest challenge when jumping from a JavaScript SPA single page app to a LiveView application?
Ooh, that's going to be a tough one for me because I didn't spend a lot of time with JavaScript and single page apps. I did write some channel apps, but I think that in many ways, the Phoenix channels experience was similar, right? So I believe that there's a pendulum that kind of swings back and forth in the industry, and it goes every 10 years or so. And rather than swinging between programming paradigms, it swings between this idea of batch style programming and interactive style programming. So you can go all the way back to the green screen. It kind of moved over for client server, and then moved back for things like Visual Basic, and then moved back for the web. And so the pendulum has been swinging in this direction. And the thing that makes Elixir so good for this type of an application is that you can keep one model in memory in your head on the server. And so I feel like I've been getting some of the benefits of LiveView all along through Phoenix channels. So I can't really help you as much there, Amos. I haven't been feeling that pain intentionally. I've been running away, kicking and screaming when when potential clients ask me to build something like that. I opt out and say, "Hey, Amos, hey, I got one for you."
Yeah, it's such a tough question to answer because I am fully convinced that working with LiveView solves for so many of the complexities and pain points of the traditional SPA. And we get into this a lot in the book because frankly, we want to sell you on the concept of LiveView as the future of taking over the world of web development. And I really believe it's true, right? So what are some of the things that frequently become painful when you're working with a typical JavaScript SPA? Let's say you've got a React app and it's going to fetch data from your Phoenix API, your Rails API, or whatever. You're going to deal with the pain of integration testing. These are two separate apps that are deployed separately, and it might be difficult to test them, even if they're housed in the same repo. Debugging becomes a lot more difficult because you're tracing requests now around the world. So you might see not only slower development cycle times because you've got the complexities of the two separate apps, but you might see more flakiness, higher degree of incidence, or you might see a bigger mean time to resolution, right? It takes your team longer to find bugs and to fix them. But with LiveView, a lot of that goes away. It's not perfect. I know it's not perfect, but a lot of that goes away. Your brain, the brain of your team is firmly on the back end. You're doing everything in one application. You're managing state in one place. And I think the reduction of that complexity, it makes for it really impacts productivity, I think, in a way that's going to feel kind of shocking if you're coming to it from perhaps working with a traditional SPA. So I have yet to experience pain points. I wonder if there will be sort of a cognitive dissonance between shifting from something like a React app to starting to work with LiveView. And that's something that I'll be really curious to hear about from you guys in the audience as you perhaps start working with LiveView, coming from more of these front end backgrounds. And that's something that I would love to hear about in the chat, or I know there's a coffee break coming up after this. So please continue that conversation in the hallway tracks.
Yeah, and I think that there's something else to be said. It's that when you're building a single page application, you're dealing with the same issues, right? The difference is that you're building the infrastructure yourself. So every time that we get the opportunity, I don't know if you could tell, but somebody is now up on my deck with a leaf blower. So
no, you're good.
How about the timing? Yeah. So I'm not kidding. Right there with the leaf blower.
Actually, I can hear it a little bit. Yeah, it's okay.
There you go. So the exciting thing though is that the helicopter is landing right outside, right? But the exciting thing about this is that when you push things into the infrastructure, good things happen, right? Because then we start to get the multiplied impacts of not just not having to write the code yourself, but also that for example, if you trust the Phoenix team to test this JavaScript infrastructure well, and I don't have to do it anymore, right? So the multiplication of effort is just absolutely astounding. So LiveView for Groxio was a project that I would not have even attacked with single page applications, and I think that I've been very effective building this with a very small team.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a theme that I've seen working with Elixir and Phoenix in general, and absolutely with LiveView, like small groups of people being able to be really productive really quickly, thanks in large part to LiveView and what the framework does for you. And that's something that, people would say a lot about Rails, that it was brand new. I remember 15-minute blog and how exciting it was for your small team to make big gains. Like LiveView is the new 15-minute blog. You heard it here first. All right, so next up, we've got a question that I've been waiting to get to. I'll sum it up, which is basically, when is LiveView the right choice? We've got Mike who's saying, I think LiveView is cool. I'm using it in parts of personal and client projects, but sometimes leaning on the traditional HTTP request response can be appropriate. It keeps things simple. So how do you know when LiveView is the right choice?
So it's interesting to me. Well, there are two things that I use to make a decision like this, and one of them is what is simple, and the second one is what is scalable. And sometimes I see with LiveView, the two of them are the same, but there are some places where request response still really is the right thing to do. Like we saw phoenix.gen.auth generated the first time, and it was built in the request response model because essentially the project flow makes sense. It is dealing with overall sessions that cut across all requests on a server, and I think that's probably a pretty good barometer for when you use it. But in terms of what's simple, I am teaching LiveView to my beginning students now rather than request response. It just takes such a big cognitive load off. So I almost believe that because of the competition, because of the number of single page applications out there, the days of the one page app are over. I think that the demands are so high, and that the ability to keep your brain in one place to work on that model and have the model render the page, it's just the right way to be building software.
Yeah, I certainly agree. All right, so I can't believe how much time has just flown by while we've been talking. We've got plenty of questions, so I'm going to stop going in order, and I'm going to try to pick up questions that like overlap with other questions. Doing my best, I might miss something. So there's one
Let's
question
do a speed
from,
round.
We'll do a speed round. All right, so we've got one question from Meryl, which is on the topic of components, which has come up from a few different questions. So I'm going to hop into this one. How easy is it to encapsulate custom JavaScript within LiveView components for animation, etc.? Is there a recommended structure or framework for it?
I haven't touched that one at all. Can't help.
No worries. I don't know if I've really touched this either.
Sorry, Mara.
So I'll talk a little bit perhaps about LiveView components, which I think just makes it really easy to layer your LiveView apps so that even a really complex feature can be decomposed in a way that is really sane, it's easy to maintain, and it's easy to keep building on. I haven't done a ton with LiveView JS interop. I think that you're not really going to tie your custom JavaScript to a specific component. I mean, you are, because you're going to add callbacks that listen for events that are related to things that are happening in a specific component. But I don't think you necessarily have to build like, oh, I've got LiveView component A, and if I want this JavaScript to fire, I also need JavaScript component A, which I think is kind of nice, right? Because you're not having to duplicate in JavaScript the composable nature of the LiveView that you're building out. But I could see then maybe people feeling like, well, all my JavaScript lives in one place. It's becoming kind of unwieldy, but hopefully you don't need that much JavaScript on top of the LiveView that you're already building. All right, moving along to did that one. We've got a question about live uploads. When working with uploads on LiveView, is there a way to validate data other than in the front end? I mean, back end validations like change sets. I think that this is going to be a fun one to answer. What do you think, Bruce?
Yeah, I think that there are two things going on there. First is the upload model, which definitely allows validations in both places. And second, I think that there's this concept that we go through in the book called schemaless change sets. And so one of the quiet ninja moves that Jose made that he kind of snuck in was this idea of breaking change sets off from Ecto when you need to, right? So you can feed into the cast statement either an Ecto model that has the metadata about the types built in, or you can you can send a field and type metadata flow through, and that allows you to break off the just the whole way that these schemaless change sets work.
Yeah, and schemaless change sets are like made for LiveView. They're not, because they're decoupled from everything, which is why they're so versatile, but they work so well in LiveView. What's a change set's job? It's managing change. What is your LiveView? It's a change management system to present your user with a UI for managing change. And you can use a schemaless change set in your LiveView just like you would for a change set for like an entity that's backed by your database. And the live uploader is just part of a LiveView form. It's just like any other form field. So adding validations becomes super, super easy. And the live upload functionality that's now baked into every LiveView gives you really nice out of the box validations for specifically working with file uploads. So you can super easily add things like you're validating the type. It's got to be a PDF. You can say, I want somebody to be able to upload 2 files and no more and no less. There's plenty of other niceties like that, but it's a pretty powerful tool.
And you control when you validate also, which is huge.
Yeah, you can say as soon as somebody starts uploading, they click this button, they attach a file, fire the validation, start the upload, or you can say wait till the form is submitted, which is a really nice degree of flexibility as well. We have 1 minute left. How should we spend our 1 minute?
Let's do a quick wrap up.
A quick wrap up. Okay.
So you take 30 seconds, I'll take 20.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. Fantastic questions coming through. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. Please continue these conversations in the coffee rooms and the hallway chats and, you know, in the Elixir forum, on Twitter, wherever. We want you guys to keep talking about LiveView. We want to learn from what you're doing as you start to adopt this technology, and read our book, Programming Phoenix LiveView, out with Pragmatic bookshelf now. And thank you, Bruce.